destroyed the great civilization of Atlantis. And Santorini, the closest neighbor to Crete and the palace of Knossos, was the location of one of the biggest explosions in recorded history. Researchers have developed a new theory, that Santorini and Crete were both part of Atlantis. The theory is based in the dramatic color of these cliffs. Plato describes quarries in Atlantis where rocks of white, black, and red were extracted from the hills. The rock was then used in the construction of a great island city. The description matches the rock found here in Santorini. This island city is described as being laid out in a series of concentric circles of land and water, each one connected to the sea by an immense canal, 100 feet deep.
There were also docks for huge numbers of ships and a causeway over which they could offload the riches, whatever they were, that were coming into Atlantis. In other words, everything that human beings could need was available in Atlantis itself.
Plato's description of the island as circular relates perfectly to the symmetrical formation of the central volcanic island on Santorini. But to prove a link is impossible without proof of life on the island before its last big eruption. And during excavations in a quarry here in the early 1900s, a fantastic discovery was made.
That layer, that white layer on top of the cliffs, is a deposit left from the catastrophic eruption in the Bronze Age. And it was digging there that they found a house site. In another case, they found a burial. They realized this eruption had buried a civilization, a culture lived there. The story then of that ancient civilization starts there with that layer of white ash.
These volcanic deposits, which still cover the entire island, fell in the course of a single cataclysmic eruption. Now our experts are stripping back the ash layer by layer to expose evidence of the lost world that lies beneath.
Here it is. This is the level that man lived on, right here. Here, in fact, is what appears to be a remnant of a wall built by man on top. And then the eruption came. The big blast started, and all of this was deposited. This is pumice, and the pumice piled up very rapidly. And then the eruption continued, 4 days of a massive accumulation of all of this material all up here, 30, 50, 60, 80 feet of this material piling up, and then way up at the top, the debris flows, the mud flows that scoured the surface. All of this, one of the giant eruptions in human history.
The first signs of life, from before this big eruption having been found, the search was on for proof of a culture that could be linked to the great civilizations of Crete and Atlantis. It was unearthed in 1966 by an American archaeologist named James Mavor, Jr. Mavor assembled a team to search the island for signs of ancient artifacts. They began their dig on the southern tip of the island, in the tiny village of Akrotiri. In the very first trench, they struck lucky. They unearthed an ancient wall buried under 30 feet of volcanic rock. As they dug deeper, the wall became a house, and the trench revealed a cobbled street. Mavor's team had discovered an extraordinary town, perfectly preserved in the ash of a volcanic eruption.
We are talking about a brilliant culture, brilliant civilization with a very advanced technology in all ways, and especially building technology.
The discovery was hailed as one of the most important finds in classical archaeology. The town remained substantially intact. Just as at Pompeii, volcanic ash had filled the city and sealed it from the elements. Its contents have been preserved for more than 30 centuries. The huge task of uncovering the town continues today. With every inch of ash that is removed, new clues to the civilization are revealed. And just as described in the legend of Atlantis, we see engineering skills that were sophisticated way beyond their time.
When I first came to Akrotiri, I was expecting something rather simple. But then I realized that this town was made of multi-story buildings. And when we are talking about multi-story, we are talking about 2- and 3-story buildings. And at some point, I realized that I was walking on the 3rd floor of a building that had been constructed 3,500 years ago. That was really extremely impressive.
Akrotiri is a truly extraordinary find. It is a city arranged with a structured assembly of interconnecting roads and paths, the earliest form of organized town planning ever discovered. And centuries more advanced than anything before seen from this period. Archaeologists have mapped every inch of the town, and from their data, our team has built computer-generated models. You are now traveling down the streets and interacting with the buildings of a sophisticated community that was destroyed thousands of years ago. Just as we saw in the Palace of Knossos, at Akrotiri there are complex multi-story buildings constructed of wood and stone. And the plumbing is even more elaborate. Fresh running water fed each house, and a sewerage system ran through the town.
There is a perfect sewage system running under the streets, and these are connected to lavatories on the upper floors of the buildings.
And yet internal bathrooms were not to become common for at least 1,000 years.
The discovery of this lavatory, as you can imagine, is truly very important. If you just stop to think, it took ages, hundreds of years to have lavatories within a house.
It was not simply the discovery of a lavatory that amazed the engineers, but also its ingenious design. The waste fell through a clay pipe to a chamber below, where water from the town drains flushed it into a cesspit. The pipes interconnected in such a way that a siphon effect was formed, drawing foul smells down the pipes and away from the lavatory. The design was centuries ahead of its time. This sophisticated system of water management matches Plato's description of Atlantis, in which he writes of ancient towns equipped with hot and cold running water. But there was one crucial discovery at Akrotiri that lent new credibility to the idea that Santorini was the island at the center of Atlantis. A fresco was unearthed, portraying life on the island 3,500 years ago.
Can we be so lucky as to have a snapshot of what this landscape looked like? Here is the peninsula, the Akrotiri Peninsula. It shows a profile of the island, 1, 2, 3 peaks. Going down farther, we see a waterway that surrounds a central island, a fairly large island. And on that island, a city. They were living on the central island. That central island was a developing volcano.
This idea of a central island port, encircled by layer upon layer of buildings, fits perfectly Plato's description of the island city of Atlantis. A city that, at the height of its power, was blown to bits in a devastating eruption. Seismologists are now following a trail of clues that leads from Santorini back to the palaces of Crete. It will reveal the full extent of the horrific disaster that tore Santorini apart and destroyed an entire civilization. In the heart of the Mediterranean, a lost world has been discovered. A palace on Crete and a town on Santorini, linked by the unique engineering of their buildings. Archaeologists have opened a window on a highly advanced people, known today as the Minoans, that thrived 3,500 years ago. Many now believe that their culture gave rise to the myth of Atlantis. Since the discovery of the palace at Knossos in 1900, archaeologists have expanded their search. Today, a network of ancient towns and palaces has been revealed across the length